the most interesting part, we have the speaker for today is Professor Osvaldo N. Oliveira Jr. Professor Oliveira is a physicist who earned his BSc and MSc degrees from the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and his PhD from Bangor University, UK in 1990. He is the director of the National Institute of Organic and Sustainable Electronics, and he served as the director of the São Carlos Institute of Physics at the University of Sao Paulo from year 2022 to 2026, and as the president of the International Union of Material Research Societies from 2023 to 2024. He is also a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and the Latin American Academy of Sciences, and also serves as an executive editor of ACS Applied Materials Interfaces. Professor Oliveira has published over 760 papers in referred journals, primarily on organic nanostructured films and natural language processing. He has pioneered the integration of statistical physics and computer science for text processing, as well as the application of machine learning to enhance the performance of sensing and biosensing systems. Around 10 years ago, Professor Oliveira introduced the concept of a fifth paradigm of knowledge generation, in which machines become capable of generating knowledge autonomously. So thank you so much, Professor Oliveira. Now the stage is all yours, and we are so excited for today's session.
Thank you very much, Apama. It's really a pleasure and an honor for me to take part on this program of ACS Talks. So I ask your permission to share my slides.
Yes, please.
So that I get this. Can you see my slides now?
We can see that.
Okay, fine. Thanks. As I told you before, from now on, I don't see you. If anyone wants to ask a question or if there is any problem, please let me know either by opening your mic or sending me a message so that I can get it. So, we at ACS, we are most dealing with chemistry and related areas, including material sciences. And but today I chose a topic which is related to artificial intelligence, and the reason I think it's very clear to all of you in the audience that AI is having a tremendous impact in every area of science and technology. And today I'm going to discuss with you how close are we to get an AI scientist, material sciences in other areas. So I started by talking about language, more specifically the language of knowledge. Through history, human beings have created knowledge and transmitted knowledge through three languages, only three languages. And in fact, I challenge you to try and think whether you can find other languages through which knowledge can be created and transmitted. So these languages of knowledge are the natural languages: Portuguese, English, Chinese, Hindi, French, and so on. The language of mathematical formulas. So for this audience, I don't have to explain it. A lot of the knowledge that humans create depend on mathematical formulas. And the language of arts, which is not as visible for scientists like us, but it's still a very important language through which humans create knowledge and disseminate knowledge. The implication of this fact that there are only three languages is that if a machine or an entity can master these languages, then this machine can do anything a human can with no limits whatsoever. And this is important because we can now think of new ways of creating knowledge. And this, in fact, has implications to the paradigms according to which humans create knowledge. Around 20 years ago, researchers from Microsoft Research published a book called eScience, in which they were summarizing the paradigms used for humans to create knowledge. According to their view, there are four paradigms. So the first one started in ancient Greece or before, was an empirical science, because at that time we did not have a framework, a theoretical framework to explain most of the observations that were made. This came with a second paradigm after Newton, Galileo, and Leibniz, where it was created a very powerful framework of physical laws and mathematical formalisms, which was very successful for centuries and culminated in the 20th century with the explanation or interpretation of how matter behaves, what's the structure of matter. And with this new knowledge, it was possible to build, synthetic materials and computers. And with this, we can have the third paradigm, in which we now can generate knowledge through experiments, theory, and computational simulations. And this also has another implication, which is that we can now store information in electronic format. I know now that for young people, that's really something that everybody take it for granted. But we only started to store information in electronic format in the 70s and 80s of the last century. So this is very new. And with this information stored in electronic format, we can mine it. We can use machine learning, we can use artificial intelligence methods to transform information into knowledge. This is the fourth paradigm, which has different names. Could be big data-driven science, big data, or e-science. The next slide, I show, again, these four paradigms with an observation. These four paradigms, regardless of how sophisticated the methods used, experimental or theoretical methods, whether you use a supercomputer or a particle accelerator, at the end of the day, every single piece of knowledge is generated by human, through human intervention. The machines themselves do not generate knowledge. In these four paradigms. So many years ago, I proposed that we were getting close to a new paradigm, the fifth paradigm, which is machine-generated knowledge. And my point was and is that this is going to change everything, because once the machines can generate knowledge, the entire landscape of science and technology will change. And this is taking place with the convergence of two big movements. These big movements are shown here. On the left-hand side, we have the big data movement. So we use a lot of data, preferably machine readable, because until recently, the machines could not read. And then we use machine learning to transform information to knowledge. The movement on the right is complementary, is the movement of natural language processing. It's similar in the methods, because we again use a lot of data, but to transform information to knowledge. But now this data is organized in a corpus. Corpus is a database for text, which can be spoken text or written text. And that's what we now use for training large language models and many other natural language processing applications. And again, we use machine learning for this. The reason why it was just taking some time to get to the three paradigm is related to these ellipses here. Because until recently, we believed that machine learning was very good for classification tasks, but not very good for explanation or interpretation. But now with these large language models, we know that machine learning can also be used for interpretation or explanation. So this slide is, again, more than 10 years old. Apart from these large language models bubble here that I put a few years ago. So we are now getting very close to this fifth paradigm, which is machine-generated knowledge. And I'm going to show examples of that. So now I'm going to talk about a few consequences. First, I will start with consequences which are already happening. So something which is taking place today. So this is shown in perspective paper published in 2023. So after ChatGPT, after the larger language models were launched. And this is an exercise in which we think of an agent or an AI agent for material sciences. And we thought of 5 functionalities for this material, for this AI agent. So the first one is material discovery and design. This has been done for more than, I would say, 2 decades, not with the name of an agent, but this has been done. So people use large databases, especially the genome projects, in which they mine this data to try and find new materials or new properties of known materials. The second one is data analysis. I'm going to show an example for sensing. Identifying novelty in research and recommending projects. This is an important point because many of those who are sort of skeptical about the AI, the new methods of AI, especially generative AI, is that the AI tools, they claim that the AI tools should not should not be creative, should not have creativity, for the reason that these tools are trained with data from the past. But then, I mean, my point is, we scientists, we are creative, and we only have information from the past. We do not have information from the future. And that's the reason why I believe that these machines can be as creative as we are, or even more, because they have more data. They have access to much more information than we humans have. The fourth is a survey of the literature, and I'm going to show an example of this. And the second one here is the last that I mentioned, is to use an AI agent to do fact checking. You may think that one of the main problems we have with these large language model tools is that they may hallucinate. And indeed, this is sort of should be expected from these tools because they are made with mathematical models. And once you are in a mathematical space in which there is no information, because they have to provide an answer anyway, they create information. And this is what we call hallucinations. One question you may ask is it possible to avoid hallucinations? And the answer is yes, it is possible. Obviously, this is not done by these companies with the large language models because it would be too expensive to check whether every single piece of information that they provide, whether it's correct. But this can be done in fixed domains or controlled domains, as is the case of generating review papers. So I'm going to show a very simple example in which we avoid hallucinations in writing review papers. So just as an example. So I will show one example in which machine learning in artificial intelligence methods can have a large impact in material sciences. And this example is for sensing or biosensing in this particular case. In this example, what we have is a plasmonic immunosensor, so a glass slide covered with nanoparticles that are coated with gold nanoparticles, coated with antibodies that can recognize the SARS-CoV-2 virus for COVID-19. So when you have a sample here, a biological sample could be, say, a saliva sample. If the sample has the virus, then it will absorb, the virus will absorb and connect with the nanoparticles. And this will change, it may change the color depending on the viral load, but it certainly changes the texture of the surface. So once it changes the texture of the surface, we can use a combination of machine learning plus image analysis to detect these changes in textures. And this is very powerful. It's very powerful, and we can classify samples and detect concentration of the virus, which is down to 1 PFU per ml. So this is a measure, this is a sensitivity, which is the same as, or even better than PCR, which is the golden standard for detecting the virus, so the polymerase chain reaction method. And the reason why it's so good is because it's very easy to distinguish the two images if they differ in texture. For this, we use deep learning, and as you know, deep learning can only be used when you have a lot of data. But in this particular case, what we do is we use transfer learning. We train we trained our method with a database of millions of images, and then we transfer the knowledge to our data set, which is very limited. It's only 800 different images, in this particular case, of optical microscope. And if you look at the images yourself, you cannot distinguish anything. You cannot do any classification, but the machines can do. And this is an important point, because the future of biosensor clinical diagnosis and monitoring, I believe, lies in very simple methods which can be disseminated in any type of setting. And this method is image analysis. You just take pictures, could be a microscope or could be a cell phone, of not of this biological sample, but of the sensing device, or this biosensing, or the sensors. Because then if there is any change in the texture, because as a result of the sensing mechanism, you can detect with image analysis. One of the main problems, as I mentioned, is that getting images, even if you have a very efficient way of getting images, it's never going to be as efficient as we need to get, say, millions of images, which would be an ideal thing to use deep learning. So that's why people from computer science are working on different methods to do data augmentation. This is a term that a few years ago it would be forbidden. We would not think of producing synthetic data, but now with machine learning and artificial intelligence, this is a hot topic, because we can get our data set and we can apply some methods in a controlled way to increase the data set. And therefore, this increases the accuracy with which we can use machine learning. Just to give an idea, for genus sensor images of scanning electron microscope images, we had, before we used this data augmentation, we had a classification for different classes of different concentrations of the virus, again for SARS-CoV-2, but this can be used for any other type of biosensor. So we had an accuracy of around 85% before data augmentation. With simple methods of data augmentation, we increased this accuracy to almost 98%. And the methods used were very simple. I show here the various methods that can be used, and shift, which is very easy, is just shift the images. You can do random erasing. You can use many different methods. In fact, the most aggressive methods, those methods change the images a lot. They were not good. Probably because as we changed the images, we sort of deleted the information that was required to classify the images. So that this, with very simple methods, we can increase the accuracy a lot. And this is the best method. Shift had an increase, as I showed you, almost 98%. So this is just to show that with AI and machine learning, we may have different methods now to analyze data, to do data augmentation, and to improve the accuracy of biosensing or diagnosis or monitoring. The other example I want to show, sorry, before I do that, I should mention something which is really crucial for the audience, which I guess is mostly young researchers. With languages, we already have the large language models, which are foundation models. What does it mean, foundation models? Foundation models means that rather than treating a small data set or a limited data set, you treat massive data sets so that you can have a model that, in principle, should explain everything in that particular field. So for languages, we have the large language models, which can be used for any application related to language. The same is now being replicated in different areas. For instance, to do image classification, to do segmentation and imaging, to do medical imaging, to do drug discovery, and so on and so forth. We can use, now physicists are also using for theoretical modeling, using, say, molecular dynamics and dense functional theories in pipelines, so that you have a model that in principle can be applied to any type of modeling using physics theories. And this can be applied to anything. The reason why I included this slide here in this presentation is that, first, all of you sooner or later will be using machine learning and AI models to treat your data. Second, many of you will be involved in developing foundation models, because your generation is the generation that's going to be developing foundation models. We have very well-established foundation models for language, but we do not have for other fields. And that's something which is probably going to be very popular in the next few years. So now comes the application for surveys. I started with a method which is what was created even before ChatGPT. And this method involved network analysis combined with natural language processing to have a landscape of a journal over a field. In this case, in this publication, we analyze journals, not only ACS Applied Materials Interfaces, but other journals from ACS and from other publishers. And the idea was to have the landscape of different journals and see how they compare. What are the sort of the main topics in each one of those? For ACS Applied Materials and Interfaces, because it's focused on applications, you see the citation network that was created is related to applications. So how did we build this citation network? What we did was the following. We got every single paper published in the journal. So this was done with papers published in 2021 or 22, so a few years ago. And so there, at that time, the number of published papers was around 40,000 papers. So we put every single paper in the network, and then once one paper cites each other, we establish a link between the papers. So we have a network of connected papers. And then we apply some algorithm to determine or to distinguish clusters from each other. So this means that this cluster here means that you have a citation pattern different from the other clusters. So we find communities of researchers of topics. For our journal, ACS Applied Materials and Interface, we have application, or we have communities for batteries, nanomedicine, organic electronics, flexible sensors, electrical catalysis, and so on. And you can also see the location of the communities. For instance, the battery community is far away from the community from nanomedicine, because obviously there are different communities of researchers and areas. You can also calculate the impact factor of the different communities. You can find out about the temporal evolution of this community. Or if you go to this website, you can see the network, so not only for ACS Applied Materials and Interface, as in this particular movie, but it can also find for 13 other journals. And then you can do many things. You can click and find the titles of the papers. You can see the relative location of the communities. You can do search. Very soon you see a search there of polymer. And then once you do the search, only the papers related to polymers will appear. So you have a less dense network, and so on and so forth. So there are different ways that you can explore this network. So what we did here was to use computational methods to have the landscape of a journal. It can be done to a field as well, without having to read the papers. So this is to exploit the capability of the computers that can handle huge amounts of data so that we can get some more information. So this very method was then used in the next paper, in which this is for a field now. We chose Langmuir monolayers or Langmuir films and Langmuir bloated films as the topic. And we found the most influential papers, so that we built a network for the field. We found the most important papers in that field, the most connected ones, and used those papers as input in a system in which we use the input, the scientific papers that are the input, and we use this architecture to generate a full review paper. So this architecture is, I would say, more complicated than it can be done today, because this was done more than 1 year ago. And now the large language model tools have evolved, and now we could generate a better review paper than which was generated last year, with higher quality, with less steps. But in those types, so more than 1 year ago, we had to use these RAGs, which retrieval augmented generation tools, in which we use this RAG to generate contents for every section of the paper, of the review paper. We had a RAG to choose the references, and that's an important thing. We forced the system to only pick references that were in the database, which is certified database, so that the tool could not hallucinate. So that's an example, very simple example of how you can avoid hallucinations from the large language models. And we also had a RAG to choose the figures for the review papers. So this is the table of contents of the review paper, so created more than 1 year ago. This is the title suggested by our tool. And then we had 9 experts in this field to assess the best, the version that we generated several versions, because the machine can generate as many versions as you want. We picked the one that we found was best, and we asked experts to assess, to evaluate the version generated. And so we asked them 3 questions. First, whether the contents were okay. They said yes, it's appropriate for the field. The second question is it a good draft? First draft is a good first draft for writing a review paper, and they all said yes, it is a good first draft. And the third question we asked is more tricky. We asked whether this version generated by the machine, is it better, worse, or the same level of what I would expect from a postdoc or experienced graduate student, PhD student? And the 8 out of 9 experts said, oh, this is better than I would expect from my postdocs. So this means that it's better. Why? Because it had a higher coverage of the subject. The organization of the topics were really very good. So everything was really good, apart from a few problems. For instance, the figures were not ideal because these tools did not want to choose recent figures. I think probably fear of copyright. And in fact, now the larger language model tools, they provide you with the reference, but not with the figures. So you have to try and use some tricks to get the figures in the review paper. But as you see, this is not a limitation of technology, it's just a limitation of the large language model tools because of their fear of copyright infringency. And obviously, at that time, the access to the literature was limited, much more limited than it is today. So if you repeat this experiment now, we would have a better review paper than in the past. But this is for review papers, so this is not original material. So you can ask now whether it is possible to have an autonomous AI scientist for material science or for any other field? And the answer is yes. There are some examples in the literature. This is one published a few months ago, in which a group of scientists from the UK, Japan, and Canada, including a company which had access to a lot of data, and they produced a system which they claim can do end-to-end automation of AI research. I mean, with examples we have in the literature today, we cannot really claim that the fifth paradigm has been proven, but we are very close to that. For instance, in our research groups, we are working on this. And I tell you, that's not an easy thing if you are using limited computer resources, or if you do not have access to all the data that's available. Because obviously this is only possible for big companies or big publishers. But I must say, from the experience that we have, and by looking at the papers that appear day after day, we are very close. And I think if big companies decide to prove it, they will be able to do it, because it's not really difficult to show that these machines now, they can, once you give it the problem, they can sort of find the best solution for that problem and do all the research and write the paper, which is not the most difficult part now. Obviously, the research that is done in these tools are only computational research or theoretical research. Because if you want to do experiments, then you need robots, and this is much more complicated. So now, as we are getting very close to having an AI system, how science might be. First of all, many essential activities will be done by AI. So this is like review of the literature, data analysis, summarization. And therefore, AI is today already indispensable for writing and revision. We can, when you're preparing projects and programs, we can do joint work with the machines, because the machines can do a lot for us. As I mentioned, manual work is still cheaper to do with humans rather than with robots. Now, just an exercise. How can we now create graduate programs in material science or in other areas in this new age? First, I use two premises in giving this, making this exercise. First, that the machines are very close to generating knowledge themselves. Second, humans can now establish the agenda of the research that is going to be performed with the machines or by the machines. And we can now be much more ambitious than in the past, because we are going to have this tremendous help from the machines. And in some cases, they are going to do it by themselves. So with very little effort from the human side. And therefore, we can think of projects which are more ambitious, that are designed for teams of students rather than for individuals. For instance, suppose that we have a project for a group of 20 students, and it's to build a self-powered software robot. I mean, I'm pretty sure that many of you in the audience know how difficult it is to produce a self-powered software robot. But now you can be bold, you can be ambitious, because you're going to have the machines to help us. And obviously, in this project, you should include the development of foundational models in different fields, as I mentioned before. You can even address social challenges and impacts. For instance, we test beds in local communities in which these projects are being developed. What are the challenges to have this type of projects? First of all, is to integrate the individual projects and ensure effective coordination among them. Because you see, the researchers are going to be, the students are going to be working in teams, but we still have individual projects, which must be integrated, and that's going to be difficult. And you also have to balance focus and breadth, because in a sense, for a student to work on his or her individual project, you need a focus. On the other hand, you need a breadth so that you can integrate his or her projects with the team's project, and also you may need to facilitate collaboration with industry and other partners. And how about student training? Student training for this, I mean, the only thing I can see now is personalized learning. We'll have to develop AI tutors for individualized instruction, and which can also help in assess the students' performance. Because one of the complaints we have now from lecturers and professors all over the world is now that they cannot assess the students anymore, because the students can use AI tools and they can do all the wonderful essays and solve all the problems using AI, and we cannot assess whether they are actually understanding what they are doing. The only way to do it, I think, is to use AI tutors, because then the AI will be able to check the students' performance. And also, as you are developing AI tutors, you can involve the students so that the students will learn a lot while developing the AI tutors themselves. For instance, for any field or any particular discipline, for instance, thermodynamics, material science, properties of mechanical properties of materials, and so on and so forth. But then, what do the students need? They need something which has always been required from the students, is to master the language of knowledge. This has not changed. And it will not change, because these are the only language of knowledge. So the students should have a strong emphasis on their training on conceptual understanding, theoretical reasoning, and mathematical formalism. So these two languages of knowledge, of natural languages and mathematical formalism, and obviously they need to cultivate soft skills and humanic perspectives, especially because everybody will have to work in groups, in teams. It will be very hard to think of projects in the future that a person develops on his or her own, because now the projects are going to be much more ambitious than in the past. So with this, I finish, and